this video, we actually only released like 3 weeks ago. This was actually our last podcast that we did, where we were speaking about the end times. And we were specifically talking about the Euphrates River drying up. Now, I thought I'd bring this one up because, I mean, it's got a few comments on it and everything like that, but it actually has already received about 2,500 views or 2,500 views. So, I mean, I think it was worth talking about. Plus, also, Dr. Rod, after we did this episode where we were talking about end times and all these different signs and everything like that that's happening with that, you said to me, wow, there's so much more I want to talk about with that one. So I thought, let's include this one and open up the floor now. Now we're revisiting. What more do you have to say about end times?
Yes, I know, but I can't remember what I was going to say. But of course, I think I mentioned to you at the time that I was preaching on end times.
Yes.
And I think it really is important for us to address end times issues because so many people are asking questions, and more so, I think, in the last 10 days or so since the terrorist invasion in Israel, of course,
Yep.
and that's ongoing, and there are all sorts of things being said publicly, all kinds of demonstrations and so on. And a lot of people, of course, see Israel as God's sort of timepiece in terms of the end of human history as we know it, and so on. So it is topical, and I think as a pastor, it's probably something we need to think about and discuss with our people to address it. So since we did that podcast,
let me jump on. You said you preached that. Are you still putting those podcasts up?
No, I haven't put that up.
But
no, it's not up. It's not available. Probably not. I might write something about it. That's an interesting one. I was recording the sessions, and I really felt the Lord say, listen, you preach to your people, the people who turn up. So I'm not really trying to preach to a broad audience right now. Okay. That might change into the future.
Because I was going to say, I'll link that below that.
No,
podcast,
look, I have a bit of a conundrum in some ways. I think the message that we have as an assembly is important, but I did feel God saying some months ago, listen, you got to minister to the people who are actually turning up and sitting in the chairs. And the problem with having a camera was that I really couldn't do some of the things I would do in the context of my own local congregation. Yeah. And then I was recording an audio version, but I had some issues, like I forgot to hit the on button, a few things like that.
We had some technical issues. The technical issue was not pressing that thing.
I do want to write about it, but I think.
Well, when you do write about it, please let me know, and we'll go back. And at some time, if you're watching this video sometime in the future, there might be a link below to something that Dr. Rod does share about end times.
Well, I think one of the things that I did want to really talk about was where does the end of the church age fit? Yes. And I have actually spent a couple of Sundays talking through that as well. But look, one of the reasons why end times often excites a lot of interest is that there are numerous views on what the book of Revelation actually means.
Yes.
And, we talked about various ways of approaching it. And I didn't actually revisit the whole podcast, but I'm pretty certain that I did emphasize that whatever particular perspective we take, we really should hold it lightly. Mm-hmm. Because the book of Revelation is not all that easy to understand. And my own sort of hermeneutic is to read any passage, chapter, book of the Bible naturally. Yep. And it's only when reading it naturally doesn't work that you should start asking questions about whether or not this is all allegory or whether parts of it are allegory, is it poetic, and so on. So there are some people who come to the conclusion that essentially the whole of the book of Revelation certainly from about chapter 4 onwards, is allegorical.
Yeah.
There are others who really talk about it in terms it's future history, and that's really the position I take, that it's on the whole sequential. It's historical, except that it's talking about future history, not past history. There are others, of course, who say no, it's really talking about past history. And Norman Geisler, in his wonderful systematic theology, says at the end of his long, detailed academic discussion or theological discussion about end times, he actually takes the position, well, this is the position I've come to. He holds in pre-tribulation rapture as I do, but he says, look, we should hold our position lightly and respect the position that other people take, and that's the stance I take as well. But I'll be quite upfront with my own congregation and explain to them what I believe and why I believe it. So we've talked about end times. I did a whole series on the book of Revelation that took me about 15 months, not 15 months of Sundays.
Yep.
But we spread it out over a period of time. I've revisited end times fairly recently, and then I spent 2 Sundays, pardon me, talking about the end of the church age, which I think is very near. So although it's obviously impossible for us to predict, I think the rapture is fairly close at hand for 2 reasons broadly. I think Western civilization is in serious decline. It may be terminal. It's not looking too healthy at the moment. And Western civilization is the only civilization which has been majorly shaped by Christian thinking. So the Christian influence on humanity is declining on the whole, particularly in terms of what we might call Western civilization. And I think there's a good deal of apostasy in the church as well. So I think those two things are signals that we're living at the end before the tribulation begins. I don't think we're in the tribulation at the moment. But look, these views are contestable.
Yeah.
And we just have to hold them with a degree of humility. We have to be able to explain to others what we believe and why we believe it, but be prepared to listen to those who have a different perspective. And really, the only thing I demand of people is please don't present to me something that is incoherent.
Yes.
Right.
So let's talk about like being coherent. There's someone did actually leave a comment of a Bible verse in Genesis that I wanted to get your take on. Of
was that Genesis 3:15?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So I'll read it out. So it was from S.White Gaming 393. Talking, and their comment is the battle between serpent seed west versus women seed east. Talking about the battle between the west and the east. The west being okay. Let's explain that for a second. What do they mean by serpent seed west, woman seed east, Dr. Rod?
Look, I wish you hadn't asked me that question because I really, really need to think about it. But there are references to the beast, to the woman, to the prostitute in the book of Revelation. The position that I take is that what is, I guess, foreshadowed in that passage from Genesis in terms of the end times is something that happens in the second half of the tribulation.
Well, let's read that verse then, or read it out. Genesis 3:15. So I will put enemy and
enmity. Yeah, it's a difficult word, that one.
Just wondering if they would. That it was. I was just wondering if I'll put enemy between you.
No, they've got it right.
No, I was just wondering if they got it wrong. I'll put enmity in between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. And I will cause another verse. I will cause hostility between you and the woman, between your offspring and her offspring.
Yeah, they're just different translations. I think it has its climax, its fulfillment in the second half of the tribulation. But, I mean, I suppose you could also say, look, it describes a great struggle that followers of the Lord have always had. In the case of Israel, it was the pagan nations around them. In the case of Christians today, it's, the pagans around them, as well as other nations. And to a large extent, I think we're seeing that played out in the decline of Western civilization that we've witnessed, particularly, I would say, in the last half decade.
Okay. Do you think any of that is really pointing to that? Because I see that verse as just, a warning of what our life will be like, not really something that's pointing towards end times.
Yeah, it has its climax, I think. That's where the climax occurs. But, I mean, different people will have a different perspective on that. Again, it's not a hill to die on, really, because I don't think our particular approach to understanding scriptures like that, I don't think it actually undermines the fundamentals of what it means to be Christian.
Yeah.
You see, so look, there are lots of areas in belief and in doctrine that we shouldn't allow to cause division, because they're not that important. It makes no difference, for example, to the call to evangelism in Matthew 28, for example. Whatever our view about end times, we should be doing everything we can to share the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I think that... do you have anything more to add about the end times things, about now 3 weeks later now?
Well, look, I've had a lot of discussions about it. It just seems to have come up a lot in discussions with people, and obviously what's going on in Israel at the moment has caused a lot of people to think about end times as well.
Yeah.
And people will grab on something like that, you see, because there's a lot of speculation about where the support for Hamas is coming from Iran, then take it back to Russia and so on. And it begins to look as if, we can see this pattern in Revelation. My response generally has been, what we're seeing is a rehearsal of what will come. Because, as I say, I believe that there will be a rapture of the church before this happens. So we will be observers, we won't be participants in what happens. So the way I look at the woes that we observe in the world today, the wars, the rivers of wars, the earthquakes, all these things, they're rehearsals. They're either what we might call natural disasters, or they're man-made disasters because human beings have been making decisions. I think what will happen during the tribulation is it will all be supernatural. It'll be God supernaturally intervening. And his objective is to rescue as many people as possible. The second half of the tribulation is, I think that's evidence of God's great love for Israel, where he's doing everything he possibly can to get them to recognize who Jesus Christ is. So it will be God's supernatural intervention. So I think what we're seeing now is, in a sense, a rehearsal for what is to come.
That's really good. That's really good. Hey, you've just watched an excerpt from the On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If it challenged your leadership or inspired you in some way, put a comment below. And if you want to watch the full episode or more content like this, check out our channel. And hey, consider subscribing while you're there.